also have a resolution here amending the temporary appropriations that we passed in December. As you might recall, we passed temporary appropriations, which was good for the first quarter till March 31st. We had budget hearings, and now we want to amend those appropriations. Mayor, what you gave us is somewhat different. What I have here is somewhat different than what we talked about in March. You want to talk about it a little bit?
In March?
In February 14th.
February, yes. Well, and going back after we knew for sure that we had these new businesses coming into town, it became evident to me that maybe we should be taking a look at tweaking not only the anticipated new revenue that we know is now coming, but to take a look at how we're structuring some of the payments that we're anticipating to make. We're sitting on $5 million, whether you know, between the general fund and the bond retirement fund. We're sitting on about, well, actually a little bit more than $1 million, about $1 million or $5.5 million, something like that.
I got one question there. Just I want a point of clarification before I go any further. Jack, one of the handouts that you gave us is estimated resources unencumbered in the bond retirement fund is $1.649 million.
Correct.
Okay, so it's about $5.5 million. Is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, about 5 million. We're three.
So 1.6, and I just want to make sure I'm reading these things.
1.6 and 3.9.
Okay, good.
Yeah, about 5.5.
Good. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So, the bond retirement, the general bond retirement fund has sufficient amounts on deposit there to cover the payment that we know we have to make without making any transfer from the general fund to make that payment. We know, and if we proceeded that way, we know we have about $800,000 left in that fund the following year. That money has been put aside for that very specific reason. We knew that we had to make these payments going forward, and that's why that money is being accumulated there. I want to point out, and I think everybody knows this, but once that money is deposited into that special fund, it's locked in that fund, and it can only be used for that purpose. You can't use it for anything else. You can't pull it back out. So the monies that we have in the general fund are flexible. We don't necessarily have to pay debt with those, although we could. But it backs up all of the other funds. We now know that we're going to be incurring some additional expenses for a number of different things. We're going to take a look, for example, at doing a little bit larger street program. We've got about 300 and some odd thousand in the street maintenance fund. Maybe the general fund is where we pull out a little bit more to do a little bit larger program than we might otherwise be able to do. We now know that, well, we knew all along, that the rec center is going to incur some additional infrastructure repairs. We've got about $100,000 set aside for that. If it turns out to be $250,000, potentially more than $250,000, the general fund has that kind of flexibility. And yes, I believe it's always better to come in with a balanced budget, if at all possible. So I saw this as an opportunity to rework the entire proposal, come in with 3.9 cash balance in the general fund, end 15 with 3.9 in the general fund, pay the debt service, the general bond retirement, out of the money that we've been accumulating for that very purpose, and still finish the year with about $800,000 in that fund. And that's how we came up with this amended proposal.
Finish year with $800,000 in the debt service fund.
Mm-hmm. The bond retirement fund, yes, $790,960.
How much is currently in?
1.650.
Just a little background on why we have that much in there, man. In 2011, when our finances hit rock bottom, we put a 2-year plan in place to help us balance the budget eventually, stabilize our finances, that way. That was on the advice of bond counsel and our financial plan. We restructure our debt. I agreed, but only on the condition that we put $250,000 aside every year into the debt service fund and planning for the 2015 this year. And one of the reasons that I wanted to put into that fund was because it couldn't be used for anything but debt service. So I just wanted to done that way. And as a result, we now have the 1.6. What did we have in the debt service fund? And you might not have this, Jack, and I apologize. Prior to us beginning to put $250,000 a year extra into the debt service fund, it was never this high, was it?
No.
I think when I came into office, it was about $250,000.
The debt service fund.
I think so, yeah.
And I know we put some of the cash from the sale of the cell towers in there as well.
Yeah, 257 when I came into office.
Okay, so that 1.6 result is the extra $250,000 putting in there every year, and some of the cash from the cell towers.
There's a sheet that I'm passing
Oh,
around that
okay,
shows
good.
the bond retirement fund balance since 2000.
So for this year, we're actually in very good shape. We don't have an urgency really to do anything this year, but certainly 16 is going to have to be addressed. We've been talking all along about this $750,000 issue that we know we have to confront, and we know that there are some large payments coming down the road that have to be made. But I went over this with Jack and Joe in a lot of detail, and we're all comfortable with this approach. We wouldn't be making this proposal if we didn't have the kinds of monies on reserve that we do have. $5 million is a pretty decent.
And Jack, correct me if I'm wrong again, looking at all these numbers, I'm going to be dizzy. If we didn't do the restructuring, our payment would have only been $22,000 less than the payment we're going to make now. That almost have been off the graph.
I think, yeah, something like that.
It's not going to really spike until 2019.
Well, no, for this year and for the next 7 years, it goes back to where it was.
Where it was.
Essentially.
Right.
It goes back to essentially where it was.
And then after the 7 years, we paid for what we did since 2011.
Right.
So I guess the question before council is simple. Do we want to pay the debt out of the general fund, or do we want to pay the debt out of the debt service fund? And that's what it was designed to do. I know the mayor and I had that conversation before.
I didn't take your advice.
Debt service fund, that's what it was for debt service. So that's all that money could be used for. General fund money, like Rick said, could be used for other things. And
I just think it's
given we're looking at $250,000 for the rec center now, and now I'm seeing the street project that I saw for the first time, I guess it's incumbent upon us to figure out what we want to do and where we want to pay the debt service.
Are we still adding the $250,000?
No,
not this year.
it was a 4-year deal.
Remember, we're going to finish, if this proposal is passed by you guys, we're going to finish 15 with about 800,000. So
Still.
in that fund. So if push came to shove, we could duplicate the same thing for 16, and it'd still be okay. We don't want to do that, but we have that kind of
Why
cushion.
not?
Because we need to build this up. We know we have this large looming issue in the
But if we're
future.
not putting $250,000 in it,
And we want to be able to do some infrastructure improvements too. I mean, this just kind of holds us flat, but if we're going to aspire to do streets and that kind of thing, we need to have more money.
how is the debt service fund being increased other than the $250,000?
If you look at this history of the bond retirement fund, Jeff, what it shows is basically all we ever did was transfer either from the income tax fund or from the general fund to make debt service. That's why you see the low balances in some of those years, and most of the balances are $200,000 or $300,000. So essentially, we only ever transferred enough in there to make that service. While we're talking about it, there's another sheet that I passed out too that shows some of the other minor changes that we had talked about that came up during budget hearings on February 14th. And all of those are small smaller items, but we did talk about them. And those are the changes that we did talk about. And those will be reflected in the ordinance that the bill will be presented to you.
I have some questions.
That 790,000, does it not include the cell tower receipts of 433,000 to get us to that 790?
400,000 of
What's 790 talking about?
these, the ending balance.
The ending balance is 790,000.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So that is in 2015, we're expecting to get 400,000.
Correct.
Okay, what happens in 2016? Do we get cell tower receipts in 2016?
Correct. I sent the section of the contract that shows that we're going to get $400,000 for
Okay, so then after 16, that's where we're in trouble.
We've known this all along. We have to make a decision.
We've been talking about the structural imbalance for some couple of years now. I think Matt started in 2012 with the income tax proposal, so that shouldn't be any news to anyone.
Well, of that 790, I think we throw another 100,000. There's 400,000 from the cell tower, and there's 100,000, which really leaves 290. So we have less those two things.
And I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
We have 790,000,
Okay.
less 400,000, less 100,000, which leaves us with 290,000 is what we've accrued. Because we take 400,000 from the cell tower plus 100,000, which I understand is pretty much standard practice just for possible future debt, to cover future debt.
$400,000 of it is the cell tower revenue. The rest of it, we did transfer an extra couple $100,000 in there last year. Not last year, in 13. Because we could afford to do that. I don't know what the point is.
Well, I guess my point is that we're going into 2016. That's the last year we're going to have any monies. And I also have a question about on our notes. We're showing 3.8 million, and we're not paying any principal off on that. And yet we're going to pay 45,840 in interest. In previous years,
We're going to pay $400,000 down on those notes.
so this is what I got today, and it says there's nothing, no principal's being paid down.
Well, I'm telling you, that was what I presented to City Council when we introduced the 2014 capital budget. That we were going to use the cell tower revenues to pay down on the notes.
Does this need to be revised?
Quite possibly. Those are just work papers. You asked me I was asked for what was the 2014 outstanding debt and what was the 2015 outstanding debt. Those are just work papers. Those are our internal work papers that we use to track all of these schedules. That's not carved in stone of how we're going to retire debt.
So of this 3.8, we're really going to throw 400,000 at it.
Not the entire 3.8. Some of that is $700,000 of that is the Hemlock Creek, which won't be retired until that project is complete. But for the most part, yeah.
I know I'm not on your committee, but I understand why you want to pay the debt out of the debt service fund, but I think Jeff asked a valid question. I know we want to balance the budget, but shouldn't we be putting money back into that fund to grow it back up? Because I know it'll pay one more year, but we have 7 more years of this, so should we not be putting some money back in, or only paying part of it out and paying $350,000 out of the budget,
Well,
or out of the general fund?
You certainly have that option throughout the year. You don't have to do it now. You have that option until the end of 15. So you retain the flexibility to use that money for other purposes if necessary. And, again, we've talked about this for the last 2-3 years. We know that we need to find other sources of revenue. That's just how it is.
Okay.
We're down to $8 million in annual expenses, and we still are struggling. We have to cover that $750,000 shortfall.
I think the important takeaway is that we intend to make all of the scheduled debt service payments that are scheduled for 2015 and still intend to end up with $800,000. That includes paying down $400,000 on the 2014 capital budget notes. And you can see from the history of the bond retirement fund here that it's never been at $1 million, and we've never missed debt service. And with $4 million in the general fund, unless council refuses to transfer the money to the bond retirement fund if it were needed, I have no intentions of missing debt service payments now.
Okay.
Wouldn't it make more sense to split it up? If we had whatever it was, the number I kept hearing was 1.1 million. Splitting that up into 8 equal parts so that we at least had some, backstop, going forward. Rather than,
For the
it
7-year
seems to me
payments?
we're shooting, we're throwing a big chunk at it right now. We're not going to touch the general fund, but then in 2016, we've shot our wad. We have virtually nothing. So instead of 140,000, there's only 70 or 80,000.
But you're still sitting on the $4 million in the general fund. That's your backstop.
I think Councilperson Barth pointed out the key factor is that if the money is in the general fund, the city has wide latitude in terms of decision making. But once that money is in the bond retirement fund, you can't transfer it out for anything. You cannot do anything
I
else with
understand
it
that, but we
except to retire debt.
But we're going to have debt. We're pushing it out, further.
And we're not delaying it. We are paying debt.
But
We're
it's
making
going
all of the scheduled debt service
Is it
payments.
not going to make it more difficult to pay that back unless we have some revenue stream in 2016 and beyond?
Well, I think we've said all along that additional revenue streams needed to be identified. I mean, I don't think that should not be a surprise either.
It's not a surprise. It's just
Sure.
how are we going to do that? How are we going to do
That's
that?
the whole dialogue
And
about
and
the
again, wouldn't it be more prudent to, kind of stretch it out so you have even more of a buffer than just your general fund?
We can't pay it off sooner than when it comes due at maturity. You
The
can't.
bonds, you're talking about the bonds. I'm talking about
Right.
the notes. What we're doing, we're going to roll over these notes, right?
Hopefully, if City Council approves it, yes, we're going to roll them over. And I'd like to pay $400,000 down on that. We don't have to. We don't have to. We can roll these notes for 5 years before statutorily we would be required to start paying down the principal.
But that doesn't help our situation 5 years out.
Well, advise time. I'm not saying that's not what I had intended. What I had presented to City Council when we did the 2014 capital budget was that the cell tower revenue, as it came in over the 4-year period, would be used to pay down the capital budget notes. In that $3,820,000 worth of notes was a $650,000 Broadview streetscape note, which Broadview Road streetscape we've been using $100,000 to pay down that $650,000 note. $700,000 of that is the Hemlock Creek Engineering. $750,000 of it is Pinnacle Park TIF. So not all of that that $3,820,000 is what's going to be needed for the cell tower. $700,000 we borrowed for East Sprague Road. So when you start to peel off all of those layers, it comes to about $2 million, $2.5 million.
Okay, I'll ask this again. Historically, what have we paid down on our notes in the last 2 years? Last year and the year prior, principal.
$100,000, and all we had was the Broadview Road streetscape cut. We had a $650,000. When I came here, it was $750,000, and now it's a $650,000 note. And we intend to pay $100,000 down on that note next year out of Broadview Road's TIF. But those are the only notes that we had that were outstanding. And now the notes that we have outstanding are that plus the 2014 capital budget.
Well, we still were kicking the can down the road for the additional revenue that we need. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing.
But we found a way to do it in a conservative way that allows us to keep the flexibility in place in the event we need to address something later in the year and meet these other challenges we're talking about. That money can always be moved if it needs to be. It doesn't have to happen now.
Well, here's my thinking. If we're going to present to the people that we have a balanced budget, that we're going to start the year at 3.9, end the year at 3.9, and this is 2015, and we know at the end of 2016 we got the 800-pound gorilla in the room. How do we ever sell revenue?
We're going to be, I think it was announced at the last meeting, we're going to be having some town hall meetings where we're going to get out there and have meetings with people and explain to them the condition of the city. I remember there were a couple of gentlemen here who listened to one of our conversations 2-3 weeks ago, and they said, why aren't you out there telling people about this? We understand now what you're saying. I think it's a matter of just getting out there and let people understand. We've been cobbling this together. I think we've done a darn good job to get to this point. But yes, we've always been saying, years out, we have to address this issue. This cannot be ignored. And I think you do a lot of good by getting out there, just meeting and talking with people.
But we don't get that many people that show up to town hall.
Well, yeah.
See, so Joe Smith reads, here's that we have a balanced budget this year, that we're going to do a road program this year, that we're going to have the same amount in our general fund at the beginning of the year as at the end of the year, and then we're going to ask him, or we're going to tell them, oh, and by the way, in 2016 we're in a lot of hurt.
I'll play devil's advocate with you. Are you saying then we should go in with an unbalanced budget so that we can tell them that the world is falling apart when we know that that's not the case?
I would say that if we're betting on the come, that's what we're doing. It's not a sure thing, Rick, that we have an additional revenue stream.
Of course not. No, obviously
It's not a sure thing. So you can't tell me in 2016 that we're going to have a revenue stream of $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, $900,000, $1 million.
I have told you the opposite of that we're not going to have that. We need that. But what I am telling you is that we're going to finish this year.
But how are you going to sell that to Joe, average citizen?
I think
when we tell them that we're doing all these wonderful things, but there's a time on the horizon that we're not going to be able to do that. We can't do that.
That's the message. You just gave us the message.
Why don't we just be upfront with people and say, look, we've got some serious issues ahead of us, and rather than here we go again. We're mortgaging the future out there. That's what we're doing.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
Well, what it means is we're spending money that we don't have.
We're spending money we do have. That money was set aside exactly for
But in
that purpose.
2016, you'll bleed that fund down to nothing. Then you're going to have
you cut it in
then
half.
you're going to have to tap into your general fund. You have to. If you have no additional revenue, if there's no plan for additional revenue, you have to tap into it.
So then let
So
me-
pay me now or pay me later, but don't be disingenuous to people and say that.
Please.
Well,
That-
now
that-
you're interrupting me, Rick. Let me talk. Don't be disingenuous with people and saying, life is nothing but a bowl of cherries, but in 2 years we have some real significant issues.
Well,
Get in front and
disingenuous
tell
is a
them now.
charged word. We are telling them that we have sufficient funds in the debt reserve to cover this year, and if need be, not that I'm promoting this, next year as well. We know that if we have to pull money out of the general fund, that it exists. We've given ourselves the flexibility to do other things with that money if we don't need to. We have $1.6 million in that fund now. When I came into office, it was $257,000. We have about $1.4 million
But that's
more.
because of what Mike said.
Of course
when
it
we
is.
when we
But that's
refinanced
not
the
the
debt,
issue.
the intention, everybody in that room at the time said, "Oh, I'm okay with this as long as we put $250,000 per year." That's how you got to the million. That's how you
So
got
your
to the
proposal
million.
then is to demolish the general fund so you can sell the people on the, you need to get this money from
I'm
somewhere.
not saying
And they're gonna
demolish the
come to you and
general
they're
fund.
gonna
I'm
say, "Wait a minute,
saying
you
we
took the money-
need to.
You took the money out of the general fund, but what about this 1.6 million that you're sitting on? Why aren't you counting that?
How many years is that going to cover our debt?
But that's the
2
response.
years.
That's the
It's 2
response.
years.
If you're going to say they're going to claim that you're hiding something by 3.9 in the general fund, why doesn't that same argument apply to the 1.6 in the debt retirement fund?
Because then you go to the people and you do this. You go, hey, the last 2 years, now we got nothing.
Well, you do have something because you've got the 1.6 million. It's the same argument.
Which would be 2.1 million.
You're making the same argument, just in reverse.
You
Well,
got
1.6 would be
you
2.1.
got to pay 1.34 million off on this debt restructuring. That's a fact. We have to pay that off.
And we are.
That's not even counting the debt.
And we
The
are.
debt's another 3.
So what's your proposal?
You're asking me?
Mhm.
I think we should dip into the general fund. And not kid around with people and say, we had to do this because in years 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we got this looming debt in front of us. And we've got to hold something in reserve.
And
And in
your
the meantime, we got to come up with a way to enhance revenue.
And your reason for dipping into the general fund is
Yes.
but you're ignoring the fact that you have 1.6 million in the debt fund. You don't think people are going to ask about that?
And
And
yeah,
the total
absolutely.
number-
Because you're telling them we have payment
The total-
out until 2022.
But the total number is still the same. It's the same. It's in your left pocket or your right pocket, but not the number is still the same. So your argument doesn't hold water.
Yes, it does. Look,
we'll
if
disagree.
if we're going to have 7,
If I have-
wait, how much do we have?
If I have it in my
$1.5
left
million.
pocket or
Next
my
year we're
right
going to have.
pocket,
Wait a
I
minute.
still
Next
have
year
it.
we're going to have 790,000. The year after that we won't have anything.
And that's why we need to look at revenue.
So you have nothing, and so then you've got 6 years of debt with nothing. I mean nothing to put towards it.
Your argument, though, is you're going to go in and tell them that we're sitting at 1.6 million, but don't count it. That's what you're saying.
What I'm saying is we need it for future debt.
But don't count the 1.6. It doesn't exist.
It does exist, but it's for
So why are we
future
getting,
debt.
why are we getting credit for it?
If you want to do these road programs, then do it.
Wait. We're sitting at 1.6, but you don't want them to count that in our favor?
The story you're putting out there is we've got 1.6,
I'm just challenging what you're saying.
but you're not telling them what happens in years 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
We've been telling them that for years, and we intend to tell them again, and again, and again.
But
that's what
as
these meetings
long
are
as
about.
here's what's going to register in their minds. As long as they hear balanced budget, these people don't understand financing. They don't understand that.
But it's a good thing Mr. Jarros isn't in the room.
I'm telling you, 90% of the people out there do not understand finance. So if you've got,
You can explain that one to him.
so if you have debt that you know you have to pay, for the next 8 years, and they go to you, what is that money used for? Tell them the debt.
Look, you're either going to be sitting on 1.6 million in that fund, or you're going to be sitting on something less than the general fund. The bottom line is you're sitting on an X amount of dollars.
I'd
How
rather,
you decide
have the dollars in the hand to pay for our debt going forward.
And I'll disagree with you, because I'd rather have the money in the general fund and maintain the flexibility to address all kinds of different issues, including debt at the end of the year. I want the flexibility. So anyway, we'll disagree.
Yeah, you made a statement before that usually you just put enough into the general, from the general fund into the debt service to pay for debt.
Right. Every city has different ways of how they handle debt. I've an informal debt fund policy that was completely different. But when I ran the history of Seven Hills, there's never been a history of maintaining a large balance in your debt service fund. There's only been a history of maintaining enough money in there and transferring from the general fund to cover the current year's debt.
The reason that we had $1 million is because we put $250 a year into it.
I think the other thing you have to remember is
That's why you have $1 million. And the reason we did that was because we knew we had this balloon sitting out here that we had to pay for.
You have to remember what Moody's did to us as a result of the general fund declining under Bankowski. They dinged us on our bond rating. And I certainly don't want to invite another reduction in our bond rating by knocking down the
What was our general fund when they dinged our bond rating? How much do we have in there?
1.5-ish.
Okay, we've got $4 million.
I want to say that.
Is our bond rating going to go?
We're not going to enhance it going down.
Do we know what the threshold is? Jack, do we know what the threshold is?
They have some key formulas, but the key to it is that if your reserves are at least fairly constant, that it doesn't denigrate the rating.
So they denigrated our rating because there was a drop.
It dropped, yeah.
Because it dropped so quickly over a short period of time.
What's going to happen in 2016 when we have to tap into the general fund? How's that going to dance? All things being equal.
Well, hopefully I'm not going to go out for a rating.
I'm not talking about a rating. What impact is it going to have on our general fund in 2016 if we don't have any enhanced revenue? What are we going to have to pull out of the general fund?
Well, we're going to have to make debt service. Whatever we're going to need to make debt service.
What is that
we're gonna
number?
have to do a transfer.
What is that number?
I don't know what that number is.
You got it. I'm sorry?
940, 19,000, 1,000,009 over the next 2 years. That's how much.
With the increased debt service now, it's about $1.2 million. That's what we have, is about 1.2 million.
That we have to
Okay.
pay.
Right. The debt service was about $847,000 in the last 4 years, and this year goes up another $430,000. So it's about 1.2.
What happens the next year? Does it go up any higher?
I don't recall, but I believe it stays fairly constant.
It stays constant. Looks like it might come down a little bit.
It's
$1,000.
It floats to about 19.
Yeah, for about the next 7 years, it stays at about 1.2.
1.2 every year.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we pay for that?
Revenues. We need revenues.
That's what we've been saying.
I don't think you're going to sell this. You can do this, but
Well,
you're not going to. You're not going to get someone to say, okay, increase my property taxes. Okay, increase my income tax. You're not going to get people to buy into that when they don't see the need for it. They don't see the need. Unless people start seeing the need, the true need, they're not going to do anything.
well, beyond the debt service, we sat here tonight and we listened to $250,000 put in the rec center, and another, I don't know how much the street program's going to be. So, I mean, if we take money out of our general fund, pay debt down, then we're probably not going to be able to do any capital improvements.
So maybe that's what we need to tell people.
You're better off having the flexibility.
So I think council needs to decide if we're gonna take that money out of the debt service fund, and make some capital improvements, or take it out of the general fund and not make any capital improvements. That's the maybe that's how you, that's what you tell the residents.
Well, I'll also say, you know, if we have a road program, I saw it was $2 million, how do you do, you know, one street in each ward, you know, balance the budget, make improvements to the rec center, and then go to people and say, oh, by the way, we need you to belly up to the bar because we don't have enough money.
You're not going to balance the budget at the end of this year if we do a road program and sink $250,000 into the rec center. Because that money's got to come out of the general fund, correct?
Or borrow. Yeah.
Or borrow.
What was that like? I started to get
We won't have a balanced general fund at the end as we approach next year if we go ahead and take money out of the street program, take money for the street program out of the general fund and make the repairs for the rec center out of the general fund. You're talking $250,000 just for the rec center.
Well, if we do a road program this year, what does that do to our debt service? So we're gonna have to do another.
Well, that's,
Depends what we do and how much.
we probably got to know some of it. Some's got to come out of the street maintenance fund. You know, I mean, we have
Got some grant money in there.
We got grant money
Well,
in
if you're
there.
gonna note it, then once again,
Yeah.
you know, you're gonna increase this 3.8 by something, and then you're gonna have to pay it down.
But hitting the general fund now only hamstrings you when it comes time to make those decisions. You make it
I
harder
don't
to
think
make
there's any
those
questions
decisions.
that in a few more years we got issues, and I think we've been hearing that everybody at the table agrees it will be bad. That's why I talked about the income taxes.
Well, if I remember the conversation, everyone 4 years ago was saying we need 4 years in order to figure out how we're gonna get some additional revenue. Here we are 4 years later, we still don't have any additional revenue. Now we're looking at 2 more years, we still don't have any more additional revenue. So if the additional revenue is so important, that's what we should be concentrating on.
Well, we tried. We lost the property. We lost the levy. We tried. We lost. So we got to switch gears here.
And spend more money.
We don't have to spend anything.
That's what we're doing, we're spending more money. We want to throw 2.25 into the rec center, we want to throw 2.1
Is
million.
that a must-have or a
into
nice-to-have at the rec center? I mean, I don't know if it's 2.25. I don't know what it is.
the
There's
roads.
some
Come on, Mike,
substantial.
you did the math just like me, it's 2.25. Add them up, it's 2.25. So we want to throw that in?
Maybe you don't do them all.
Maybe you don't do them all. Is right.
Well,
Yeah.
that's just it.
Yeah. That's why I was asking to prioritize. We're just thinking down the road a little bit.
I really
Some money needs to go into the rec center. No question about it.
And don't forget, we're sitting on.
I think we make that decision.
We're sitting on $100,000 already for the rec center without dipping into the general fund.
I mean, I think the point the mayor's trying to make out is the general fund, you're a little bit flexible with it. The debt service fund, you're not flexible at all.
Then why did we even accrue? Why did we even put some money into
For
the
exactly this
For
purpose.
this reason.
exactly
That's why I had the
this
big argument with him before the budget hearings. So that's what that money's
So we have
for.
this money because we know that we're gonna have to pay down the debt 4 years hence, and now we're saying, now we got all this money in
Not
here.
4 years hence, we have to pay the debt now.
No, 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
4 years ago.
Right.
And so now we put $1 million in and everyone goes, oh,
$1,600,000.
now we've got
$1,600,000. Come on, don't shortchange this.
$1,600,000, all right, we got $1,600,000 because you got $400,000 from the cell phone tower.
Oh, yeah,
Deal
that's
as
all part of
well.
it.
And you only got 1 more year of
And
that.
that money was put in there for this exact purpose.
To pay down the debt.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's
So
what we want to do.
what's the big deal? It's
Well,
like a bank
that's what I
account.
said. What's
It's
the
a
big
bank,
deal?
it's a
Let's pay
bank
the debt
account.
and be done.
That's what we want to do. We want to pay the debt out of the debt service fund. And you're saying,
But
no, use it out of the
then,
general
but the
fund.
intent was to cut it up into 8 equal chunks. And now we're taking 2 big chunks, and then we have nothing 6
I don't
years
think
to
that was the
wait.
intent, right?
Yes, it was the intent, Mike, that's exactly what we were doing. It was to lessen the burden on the general fund over that 8-year period. That's what it was. And now we're gonna do it in 2 chunks, and then we don't have the other 6 chunks that we need at all, nothing.
So.
Well, that's how I feel.
So what do you propose?
I don't know, I have to give it some thought, because, you know,
Well, you know, looking at these numbers and they don't make sense to me, which by the way, Jack, I've got to point something out to you. This debt service schedule, the general fund, I'm sorry, general obligations bonds, there's an error on this sheet. And 1.195 million, Series 2008 Project B, it should be 2,065,000 rather than 1,195,000. So that, you know, there's an error. So I look at this.
Why do you say that's an error, Jim?
Huh?
Why do you say that's an error?
Because it doesn't add up to the 10,765,000. You've got 10,765,000 broken down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you add those 7 together, you're short 870,000. It's a mathematical error. That's all it is. So I have this one that has an error on it. Not that it's a big deal, but you know, I have to go by something. And I have this one, this worksheet that has 0 on it, and I just find out today that we really approved are going to pay down 400,000.
We don't have to. That was my proposal to council.
Are we going
We
to?
don't have to. That's up to council.
Are we going to pay down that? Are we going to put 400,000 in there?
That's going to be up to council.
And does that come out of? Well, let me ask you. Does it come out of the debt retirement fund, or a note?
Sure.
Okay, so if we pay 400,000, we still will have 790,000 in that fund.
Yes, because I got another 430,000 coming this year in June. And I got another 430,000 coming next June.
And that's the end of it. Yeah, that's the end of it.
Okay.
That's the end of it.
No surprise, we've been saying this all along.
Right.
Well, we come right back to, right around in the circle. Well,
And if the sky is falling,
philosophically, no, I don't agree with this, but, you know.
if the sky is falling, we don't have to pay anything down on these notes until 5 years from
I
now.
understand that it's a safety valve, and I understand the whole idea is to give us some flexibility, but in that, let's say we didn't do anything for 5 years. Then you have to roll it over into a bond. And then you have no
No, you don't.
flexibility, 0.
No, you don't.
What happens at the end of 5 years?
You can continue to roll it, you just have to begin to pay something down on the principal. You got to pay something down on the principal.
How much is that something?
Whatever you want to pay.
$1?
Well, whatever you want to pay. The law just requires that you start paying something down on the principal.
Okay, so let's say that this 2004. And we roll this thing, and what's the average life? What's the life expectancy of the road? What do we do? 10 years, 15 years?
10, 15.
Okay, so let's roll it out 10 years. So now we've exceeded the life expectancy of that road, and we haven't paid it off. Is that good finance? Because that's where we're headed.
Those are hypotheticals.
That's where we're headed.
I got nothing for that.
Well, that's why they tell you got to do something in 5 years. Because if you're allowed to roll it over, you know, infinitum, people would do that. They'd never pay anything. And then this project that you funded for $1 million, you never paid it off. And then that road needs to be repaired again.
The question really is pretty simple. We either pay it out of the general fund or we pay it out of the debt reserve fund. It really comes down to that. I think we made a very logical, clear argument about why it needs to come out of the debt reserve.
Well, I will say this, if that's what we're going to do, then I would say forget about a road program this year. Because we can't afford it, we're just adding to our debt.
Again, you've got other sources of money. You've got a TIF project that's going to get paid for. You've got a grant that's going to pay for some work. We're sitting at about $300,000 in the road maintenance fund. About another 100 and some odd thousand.
We've already committed to the grant.
Hold on. About another 100 some odd thousand on East Sprague. So we have some flexibility there.
You can't do a $2 million road program.
Oh no, we never said we could do $2 million. No way. Not unless you want to dip into the general fund, but that's going to be your decision.
My decision would be no. No. We can't afford any additional debt. We're going to struggle to pay.
Well, it's not debt. You're spending out of savings.
You're going to put it on a note. That's how,
Well,
that's
you
how
can
we
pay for it out of the general fund.
You could, but we aren't going to do
No,
that.
I don't know what you're gonna do. You guys are gonna huddle up and decide what you're gonna do.
We put it on a note, and then that means our debt is now increased again.
Or you pay it out of the general fund. You could do that.
Okay, well, you know, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't try to save the general fund and then pay it out of the general fund.
Sure you can. What you can't do is pay the debt out of the general fund and then use that money to pay for a street program. That you can't do. But that's what you're proposing.
No, what I'm saying is we're taking, instead of 8 equal chunks, we're going to blow it in 2.
I don't know where the 8 equal chunks comes from.
Our debt service.
I know what you're saying, but
Our debt service is 8
I don't
years.
know that
The
was.
schedule Mike just had.
I don't know that was the agreement back then.
It's 8 years.
I know your
of
math. I get the
additional debt.
math, but I don't know that that's.
So that reserve was supposed to be used to pay off this debt going forward.
Is that by ordinance?
No, that's what everybody sitting in the room nodding their head in
All
agreement
right, so
saying.
does that mean
Why
anything?
did we put the money
Assuming
away?
that that's what happened, does that mean anything?
Why did we put it
I
away?
nodded my head to Mr. Jaros and got kicked in the butt for it.
Why did we even put it away then if that wasn't our intent? Jack, why would we do that?
Pay debt service.
So now, instead of paying the debt service over 8 years, you're gonna take that money and you're gonna use it in 2 years, then you have nothing left for the additional 6. That's where we're headed.
No,
Paying debt service.
you have money left.
Are you saying to pay less toward the debt service this year?
No, I think he's saying to
No,
pay it out of
no,
the
we-
general
we-
fund.
Are you
We
saying,
put 1.5 million.
are you saying to pay less money out of the bond retirement fund for debt service? You're talking this 8-year chunk.
Yeah, I guess that is what I'm saying, because you're gonna need it in the last 6 years.
Can we do that without defaulting or?
No. Because you gotta make up that shortfall somewhere.
You have, Tom, you have a bond.
I know,
A bond is, you're locked into a bond. A note, you have some flexibility,
Right.
okay?
I'm saying if you push it farther down the road by paying less out of the debt service fund, okay, and push it farther down the road using your eight chunks analogy. What I'm asking over here of the mayor and the finance director, does that put us in a more precarious situation from the point of view of, you know, like defaulting on your mortgage?
I don't know. I'm not understanding what the big argument is. I mean,
So what you're saying, Tim, 1.6 divided by 8, this is real simple, 200,000. You're saying paying 200,000 out of the debt service fund and another 230,000 out of the general fund? Is that what you're saying?
Essentially, because what you've, all right, we'd always been talking about 1.1. Now all of a sudden we find out we got 1.5. All right, 240, 200,000, doesn't matter. So you got 200,000 that you would use for your debt service, and then the balance of that would have to come out of your general fund to make up the shortfall. The next year, 200,000. And now, in years 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you still have 200,000 that you can apply to it.
So, I mean, just getting to 2015, what you're saying is $200,000 out of the debt service fund, and $230,000 out of the general fund to pay debt service issue. Debt service,
Yeah.
230,000?
Yeah.
the additional amount.
Yeah, whatever.
The additional amount that kicks in this year is 400.
Oh, so it's,
Going up to 1.2. We've been paying 847, 847. Now it's going up to 1.2.
it's not an additional amount.
So you're talking 500,000, 400,000. And you got, it's coming from somewhere. That's all. That's all I'm saying, is that we'll have no reserve out there when we really need it, if we don't do something to enhance revenue. It's just,
And that's the message to the residents that you keep asking about. It's simple math.
Both ways are simple.
maybe you wouldn't need as much, you know, if you spent what you had more prudently.
You mean on the rec center?
No, on the, if you spent out of the debt fund and you spread it out over the 8 years rather than spreading it out over 2 years. That's all we're doing. We're spreading that 1.6 million, 1.5 million over 2 years. That's what we're doing. Taking half of it now, half of it next year,
then we have nothing
Assuming
going
you
forward.
do nothing about revenue in 16, and assuming that you don't dip into the general fund if you don't do something about revenue. The whole idea here is that the general fund has the flexibility to move money around at any point in time. So you asked about a backstop. The general fund is your backstop.
In 2 years, you're going to have to put 800,000 out of the general fund.
I don't know. Depends on what you do
All
about revenue.
If nothing changes,
Well, why would you assume nothing will change?
That's the worst case scenario.
that's the worst case. Thank you, Jeff. That's
So
the
why
worst
would you
case scenario.
assume that you're not going to get somebody to do something different?
Like what?
Like
Adjust the
enhance
credit.
revenue?
Council has the authority to adjust the credit.
No, do that.
I know nobody does it here. Well, easy way out. It's not the easy way out.
Sure it is.
The easy way out is letting the voters decide.
Oh.
Making a tough decision is adjusting the credit. To me, that's the tough decision.
Well, the mayor just talked about having to sell this to the voters.
I hate saying sell it. We're not trying to sell anything.
That's
Sell
exactly.
it.
Come on, Rick. That's what we're doing.
I don't use
any
language
kind of
like
a,
that.
any kind.
That's charged language.
Explain it to the voters.
Well, we're trying
All right,
to
you have to
get people
explain it to the
understand.
voters.
Selling has
That's
a
the same thing.
bad connotation to it.
Okay, I'll
Like
use a
selling
different.
the
I'll use a
Brooklyn
different
Bridge or
word.
something.
You know, we're talking about
We're
semantics. now.
explaining the reality to people.
Now we're talking semantics. Okay, so
No, we're not.
Yes,
Selling
you
is a
are.
bad, we're not selling anything. I'm not selling a product. I'm explaining something.
all right, how are you going to explain it to?
If you just said it 3 or 4.
We're going round and round here. Tim, you said you want more time to digest what you had got tonight and look at it. I want to at least get this on for a first reading. And it could be amended.
Okay,
So I think
I'll
the
wrap it up.
decision-
I'll wrap it up, and I'll say.
But I mean, the decision, we know what the decision is. How do we want to pay debt service? Out of the general fund or out of the debt service fund? And if, or a combination of both, that's the
Exactly.
decision.
That's all I'm saying. I'm not in favor of.
But I'd like to get it on for the first reading at least. And we. Okay. And you could digest those, and this will be continued, this conversation with the voters.
I mean, I think I understand it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad everybody else here heard both sides of the argument, because you're all going to have a vote on how you want to pay the debt service. So is there anything else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn finance.
Second.
Aye. Around at 10:25. I guess that's it for you.
Caucus is done. I don't know what stuff in here.
Well, we know what we have to do.